Welcome to It's All Your Fault on True Story FM, the one and only podcast dedicated to helping you with the most challenging human interactions, those involving high conflict people. I'm Megan Hunter, and I'm here with my co-host, Bill Eddy.
Hi, everybody.
We are the co-founders of the High Conflict Institute, where we focus on training, consulting, coaching, programs, educational methods, all kinds of things, all to do with high conflict. Today, we are back from our brief hiatus where we've been pretty busy. We weren't napping, although we probably wish we were when you hear what we've been up to. I think this might be, Bill, our 7th season starting today. Not that we've recorded 700 episodes, but I think we're over, 100 or 200 episodes at this point. So pretty exciting.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it really is. That's a lot of talking that we've done. So today we're going to talk about starting this season off with why it's so hard to leave abusive relationships and whether, high conflict people are involved in this and have a role in it. So why don't you leave? Why didn't you leave? It's a common question. It's logical and common sense. So then why is it so hard to leave? We'll talk about that. And this doesn't just cover romantic relationships. This is any type of relationship. So we're glad you're here with us. We'd love it if you give us a like. If you're watching us on YouTube, hit that thumbs up button and leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'd love to get that kind of feedback. Bill, let's get caught up. What have you been up to? I know you've been busy. I've been busy.
Well, I got in a great vacation, a couple weeks in Portugal, my wife and friends, and we did two opposite things. The first week, we hiked on the Camino de Santiago, which is a walk of potentially hundreds of miles. We did 60 miles.
In how many days?
In 4 days. And it was definitely intense. We're both hikers, but we're not used to doing 60 miles in 4 days, and we were pretty exhausted. But it was wonderful. Walking through Portugal, we walked through towns, through farmland. You could understand how beautiful that could be.
Yes.
And the idea was it was a traditional Catholic journey to be kind of a spiritual journey, reflect, think, all of that. I didn't do it for religious reasons, but it was a good time to reflect because you're just walking and there's miles ahead of you. And it was good to clear the mind and also to really appreciate the outdoors. I always say that helps deal with high conflict. Getting outdoors, hearing the birds singing, just feeling your feet on the ground, making progress, all of that. But that was the first week. The second week, we did the opposite. We went on a Viking cruise where there's lots of food, lots of drink, hanging out with friends, seeing beautiful views go by, vineyards, little towns, churches on the hillside, just all of this stuff. So Portugal's a beautiful country, and it was a great, totally different experience. So it was a good time, refreshing, and now back to helping solve problems. And I missed that a little bit. I didn't have my laptop with me, so I was forced to relax, and I did, but I did get thoughts about problem solving. So it's good to be back with problem solving as well, and good to be back with you discussing these things and finding solutions for people. So what did you do? I know you were working while I was on vacation.
I'll take a vacation eventually, but yeah, while you were on the European continent, I flew over to Australia and got to see so many, good friends that I've made over the years. I think this was maybe my 19th trip to Australia. And so I got to do some great work out in Tamworth, New South Wales with JobLink Plus. Saw 2 kangaroos on the road on the way. So, we don't see that in the States. It's pretty exciting. And then we flew up to Darwin in the Northern Territory and did some training for the Northern Territory Principals Association. Look, they have some studies about the burnout and the state of well-being for school principals and I guess school staff in general. Lots of conflict, lots of, just a changing world right now, and it's really hard on people. So I hope we're of some help up there in Darwin. And then flew down to Alice Springs, and where we also trained for the same group, but for, that location. And then on down to Melbourne, where we spoke for a new client, the Melbourne Archdiocese Catholic Schools, a big group, and they were so fun. Every group is wonderful. I have to say that. Some are just higher energy, and that was just a very high energy group. It was nice. And then over to the Australia Financial Complaints Authority, it's been so good to work with them over the years and got to meet some new people. But here's the craziest thing of the trip. We were in Alice Springs, which, if you're not familiar with Australia, is right in the middle of the country, and there's not much around it for a long, long ways, right? So we did our training, and I thought, well, I'd like to stop by the Family Law Pathways Network office, because I've done a lot of training, and you too, Bill, for them nationally in the past, but specifically in Alice Springs too. And just thought I'd pop in. And so I was introducing myself to the person at the front desk. And turns out she lived in Scottsdale, Arizona, where I live, which was the first funny thing. The second thing is I'm trying to explain why I popped in. A couple of gals came out of the office, and I'm sure they're listening to this podcast right now. Bill, and one of them, right as I was saying one, I'm from the High Conflict Institute. She goes, "Oh, I recognized your voice. I listened to the podcast." That was really fun, and you just see how much reach a podcast can have. And so we're grateful for all of you, and big shout out to all the Family Law Pathways Network people and everyone else over there. So I added up, Bill, the number of miles I flew in 61 days, which was all of April and May. And so I traveled 38 days, and I flew 36,000 miles.
My 60 don't sound as impressive now.
But you had to walk yours. I got to sit the whole way. So I think yours was way more impressive. But it was a great time, and I'm home now for a bit, and it's good to be home. So,
excellent.
Yeah. In the meantime, we released something new called New Ways for Couples and Families. This is specifically meant to help couples who are struggling in their relationship, and maybe some other things. So, Bill, why don't you tell us a little bit more about that, since you created it, and who it's for and how it can help?
After doing New Ways for Families for separation and divorce, we wanted to have something that taught the same basic skills to people before reaching that point, and maybe helping them avoid separation and divorce. So we took the 4 big skills: flexible thinking, managed emotions, moderate behavior, and checking yourself, and took a lot of examples for intact families. And a lot of it is for couples, but also for parenting. And couples that are doing fine and want to just strengthen their skills can benefit from this. Couples who are shaky and unsure, will this marriage work, can take this, and it will give some skills that may help make a difference. Both parents in the couple could take this together or separately, or even one person. And so we've already had individuals that say, I'll take this. My husband, my wife is so busy or isn't interested, but I want some skills. And I think the whole family can benefit even from one person learning the skills. So it's for co-parents, intact families, and parenting the kids. So the kids learn these 4 big skills for life, we call them. And why not? Why not teach them early on and help them in their future relationships?
That would be a nice goal to have, because as we both know, everywhere we travel, every email we receive or contact or request, it's to do with really challenging behaviors and relationships.
Let me mention it's 8 self-directed sessions so that people know what they're committing to. You could spend approximately an hour on each session. So it's an online class, self-directed, your own time, your own location.
Really
trying to keep it simple.
Yep. So we'll put that link in the show notes. We'll also put a link in the show notes for the conflictinfluencer.com website, which will launch July 8th. Finally, a place specifically just for individuals of any type of relationship who want to get some support, learn some skills, take some classes, join community, all of that. So we have a sign up form so you can get alerted. We'll put that link in the show notes. So, Bill, let's get on to today's topic, which is about why it's so hard to leave relationships. You wrote in your book, A New World of Adult Bullies, about a domestic violence example. Briefly, kind of a summary of it. FKA Twigs, a British singer and actress, shared her experience of domestic abuse in a high-profile relationship with actor Shia LaBeouf. Despite having wealth, independence, and a strong support network, she became entangled in a deeply controlling and emotionally abusive relationship. The abuse began with intense affection, a tactic known as love bombing, followed by possessive rules, criticism, and isolation. LaBeouf convinced her that others were against her and that only he truly cared. A manipulative tactic referred to as the bully's story, which creates a false crisis, a villain, and a hero dynamic. Though she had the means to leave, Twigs explained that the emotional damage left her feeling too diminished to break free. Her self-worth eroded so deeply that the idea of leaving and rebuilding herself felt impossible. With the help of a therapist, she eventually managed to escape the relationship. Her case highlights how even highly capable individuals can fall victim to coercive control and how bullies use emotional manipulation to gain and maintain power. As of early 2024, her lawsuit against LaBeouf is still pending. So I don't know if it's still pending at this point. But Bill, you wrote about that in your Bullies book last year. And then just recently you wrote an article titled, Why is it so hard to leave abusive relationships and what can be done to help? So what inspired you to, write this article, on coercive control and abusive relationships? Because I know you're always problem solving and thinking about all of this.
It really came out of some consultations where people said, a lot of professionals don't get it. My friends don't get it. Family don't get it. Why I didn't just leave. We find this in the workplace. We find this in abusive relationships. We find this in communities sometimes where people say, why don't you just move, get away from that nasty neighbor.
And family. Beyond the romantic relationship, within families themselves, and elder abuse and any age or stage.
Yeah. And actually, speaking of elder abuse, it's really hard for elders to just up and leave abusive relationships, which may be with relatives or caregivers who are out for their money or things like that. So, but the psychology of it is what I really wanted to focus on, because often there's, financial reasons that someone won't leave a job because, they're a year from retirement, they need the pension, they need that. Or in a family where the higher income earner is abusive, and what are you going to do for income if you leave that person? So finances can be a factor, but the psychological factors are harder to see. And this is when people say things like, why didn't you just leave? And the coercive control, as you mentioned, Megan, is a big factor and in many ways a hidden factor. And it's getting talked about a lot more these days, especially in family courts and people concerned about abusive relationships. So the idea with coercive control is that one person really wants to dominate and control the actions of the other person. And this can include not letting them leave the house, or in the workplace, not letting them leave to, take their child to the doctor, things like that.
Withhold in medical care.
Yeah, so medical care, health care. Some abusers in domestic violence cases don't want the victim, survivor, to go to health care because they'll see the bruises and they'll see what's happening. So but it grows, and that's the thing that makes it harder and harder and harder rather than easier to leave an abusive relationship. From the outside, it looks obvious why someone's beating up on you, holding on the money, not letting you go to the doctor, not letting you see family and friends, all of this kind of behavior. It's like, well, yeah, who would want to live that way? But the thing is, inside that relationship, one of the big things that comes with coercive control is self-doubt and lower self-esteem. And I think that's what FKA Twigs was talking about, is she became lower and lower and lower with herself and just felt like, I don't have the ability to climb out of this hole. And a lot of what people don't realize is what gets said to people in relationships with coercive control. Things like, no one would want you except me. You're a mess. Just look at you. It's all your fault. You never get it right. You're incompetent. And if you're a parent, they might say, you're a terrible parent. Even the children don't like you. May not be true, but saying that suggests to the children they should be saying that too. And if the dominant personality in the family is saying all these negative things about the other parent, it's common that the children start saying it too, because children always go where the power is, just for their own survival. So you hear these kinds of things. You're a lousy parent. You're disgusting. Your morals are weak. You have a weight problem. When you have a constant barrage of that, it's hard to not absorb some of that and go, well, I can't really leave. I'm a terrible person. So I think that's part of it. But then friends and family, that's one of the things that I also looked at. Friends and family say things, oh, he's such a great guy, just get over it. Or community people say, this person's such a upstanding citizen. How could you complain about him? You think of someone like O.J. Simpson, who had this wonderful public image, but Nicole Brown Simpson called the police several times because he was beating her up. And a lot of those calls were recorded. All that stuff came out after he murdered her. But it was hard for people to believe that such a, outstanding person. And the reality is it's two separate things. You can be an outstanding community person and in private. This is private behavior. And that's why it's so hard to leave too, because no one else can see it. So you have community saying that. Then you have cultural values. You have people saying, you're supposed to try, you're supposed to stick it out, you're supposed to, that's what marriage is about, just keep at it, and time and love will heal all wounds, is the old theory. Right.
Right.
And the songs, there's all these, I will follow you wherever you may go, those kinds of things. Remind me not to sing on the show. But there's so many cultural messages that say you should stay put, and you don't want a job history look like you're jumping job to job. So even if it's a bad thing, you feel like you can't really leave. It's psychological power.
I kind of wanted to go back to the messaging you were talking about. You're worse than dog vomit. It can get really bad. The things you were saying, they're awful, but it can get even worse. Then we jump into maybe the next level of control, which is allowing you or dictating where you can go and can't go, who you can talk to and who you can't talk to. Would you say that's a next level or just a part of it?
I think it's part of it. It grows. And what's interesting, one thing I got into was the principle of reciprocity, which is that relationships kind of reinforce each other. And one of the combinations is dominant and submissive. This may be not very significant difference, but it may grow and grow and grow. And so you think of a, singer like FKA Twigs, not a submissive person, but she was in a submissive role in that relationship and became more and more submissive, which reinforced he became more and more domineering, to the point he said, you can't even, in a restaurant, you can't look in the eye of male waiters. And I hadn't heard of that before. But that's an extension of coercive control. So I think in many ways, it gets worse for both of them. The person in the domineering position just gets comfortable with power and yet isn't happy. So they figure, I need more power, then I'll be happy. Only that's the opposite of what would really make them happy. Equal relationships are the happiest relationships.
Right. They just don't know how to get there, and they don't know another way. And I suppose it really does feed them when they get, when the person becomes more submissive, because you may have at least somewhat healthy person, emotionally healthy person who gets into a relationship like this. With anyone else, they would not be in the submissive role, but they end up being in the submissive role with this person. And I think it's hard for people who've never been in an abusive relationship or been exposed to it much for long periods of time, what it does to the brain, right? To the victim's brain, because it is strange. Why don't you just leave? This is ridiculous. No one would allow themselves to be treated this way. Well, I would, because not me personally, but thinking in that role, if I've been, subjected to this control, I don't want to look bad. There could be a piece of shame attached to this. Like, I got myself into this, and, my family will look poorly upon me, or my friends, or, maybe the world, that you're in a celebrity role. I think about the Diddy trials going on right now, and the women in his life, are testifying. Former women in his life are testifying against him, and there's video of him dragging Cassie through the hotel hallway out of an elevator. I thought it was interesting, though. The mother of his children, that he was in that relationship before the relationship with Cassie, who's the main person who's testified against him in the trial. The mother of his kids was treated differently, or so, what I've read, that he treated her with more respect. Whereas subsequent relationships, they were extraordinarily controlling and abusive. So what do you think that dynamic is?
There's the saying that power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And I think public figures like that become more powerful may start in a relationship that's more equal, but start believing I really am special. I really am superior. I really can, demand more from the people around me. And I've heard other stories like that, where there's a person with an ordinary relationship. This may not be a good comparison, but an example is Ted Bundy, who was a serial killer of women, had a co-worker on the helpline in Seattle who he stayed friends with. And they just had kind of a friend's relationship. She had no clue he was out murdering people. So it's possible. You hear about some of these other people that have, they're a serial killer, but they have a stable marriage, and they're active in their church, and they look good in the community. That's one thing, is the hidden aspect of this. The power of secrecy is important. I know, like in drug and alcohol treatment, we talk about that you're only as sick as your secrets, and that secrets often eat away at relationships and individuals. So secrecy is a big part of how abuse can progress, and the importance for people to know there's way out. There are ways out. Oh, and one thing I wanted to mention is, for men, that some men are abused. I think maybe 10 to 15% of domestic violence is against the male partner. There's also abuse in gay relationships between women, between men. But men who are abused, particularly ashamed, and often don't come out. People say, well, that hardly ever happens. Well, you hardly ever hear about it. But I know, when I was active as a family lawyer, I had a couple men who were just kind of terrified of their spouses and soon-to-be ex-spouses in the exact same dynamics as the women I had who were victims, survivors of domestic violence. So the shame and that it's for men as well.
And it may not be physical violence. It may be but it could be other types of abuse, right? And control. Like I have the power to put you in jail. I have the power to cause you to lose your job. There can be those kind of threats in this coercive control in any type of abusive relationship. But I think we hear this a lot when it comes to the dynamic between women abusers and the men they abuse. So they're walking eggshells.
Well, it's interesting. One of the cases I had was the woman totally controlled the finances and the man was not allowed to know their financial condition. And he said, I'm sure she's funneling money aside. And he's working and putting money into the family, but she's keeping all that secret. And that was one of the big issues is how can he find out where the money went during the marriage, because he had no clue. I said, well, make photocopies of account statements. And he says, there's accounts that I don't know anything about. And I know that's true, but I don't know where to find them. And he was just fearful of her. She could yell him down out of looking for things. One thing I want to add that reinforces what you're saying is even when there is physical abuse, it may not be very often. That maybe once a year, every other year, something happens and there's a violent incident. But the rest of it, that could happen. So that's how they keep you under control.
I think what's really, kind of the common thread here is the victim is either vulnerable to begin with or they become vulnerable over time. And once you get in that situation as a vulnerable person, let's say someone elderly, someone with a disability, someone who has to rely on others or maybe daily care of some sort, some kind of help, I think they're probably the easiest targets for abuse. If they have someone around them that is in that abusive role, it makes it so much easier because they're so dependent on the abuser for all of their needs. I wish that all people who work in, child protective services, in adult protective services, any kind of protective services, really had an understanding, and I'm sure many do, but of what's going on behind the scenes. And I guess that leads us into, before we talk about kind of what to do about this, in the article you mentioned the cluster B personality disorders, and we talk always on this podcast about the 5 types of high conflict personalities. So if they had this information, perhaps it would be, they could investigate a little bit more deeply instead of just listening to that abuser, listening to that bully who's putting out a charm offensive, right?
Right.
Everything's fine. No, it's great. Then you have the vulnerable person who's agreeing, yeah, no problem here, because they're so dependent on this abuser for everything. So it's a strange dynamic. So, what do you think about that? And then maybe what to do about that if you're in that role of someone who needs to report an abusive situation to a protective services.
Yeah. Well, let me first talk about the personalities. People say, well, who would do this? Who would be like this? And it really does seem to be people with traits of cluster B personality disorders. And cluster B is the one that's really associated with domineeringness, vindictiveness, intrusiveness, according to research. Cluster B, the 4 personality disorders in cluster B are narcissistic, antisocial, borderline, and histrionic. And you can find more about those with some of our previous shows. But the theme here is that they do tend to dominate and look to dominate the other person in relationships, and that it's part of who they are. Personalities develop from genetic tendencies at birth, early childhood, the first 5-6 years of life, and abuse, trauma, abandonment, all of that can spin someone off into becoming someone that feels like they have to control another person just to feel okay. And also the cultural environment. And we have a cultural environment that puts a lot of energy into personality disorder behavior like violence, abuse, vindictiveness, all of that, a lot through our entertainment, dramas, etc., but also through what we see in the news. We see the worst news. We see, someone acted badly in another country and it made tonight's news. It's like bad behavior from the world is in our faces almost every day. And so to some extent, that also gives people permission to act these negative ways or gets them thinking, so that's how you get ahead in today's world. And once it becomes part of someone's personality, then it becomes more and more automatic. And that's who there are people who will dominate other people, etc. Now, I want to say in terms of personality disorders, not everybody with a personality disorder does this dominating, vindictive, intrusive behavior, but there's tendencies there. There's also treatment. Some people overcome a personality disorder in some cases. And in terms of like domestic violence, people go through group treatment program, like 52-week programs for an hour and a half a week, learn skills and develop more empathy for their victim. That's possible. So there's a whole range here, but the personalities that engage in this behavior are not the average person. We're talking, personality disorders are about 10% of people. We say high conflict people overlap maybe half and half with personality disorders. So high conflict people may be about 10% of people. But the people that are dealing with them are mostly doing it in private and feel isolated, and it's hard to get out. So that's personalities. Now you were getting into the other question. I'm already forgetting what it was. What
that's
to
all right.
do?
Yeah. Before we get to that, I was just thinking about the amygdala and why people stay. So if you're in a fear mode, you're with an abusive person, and there's probably loud voices. There's probably angry voices, angry facial expressions, angry or domineering body language, body posture. So I'm wondering if the victim then is, the amygdala is registering that and just kind of living in that fear mode a lot of the time unconsciously. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. And you get used to subtle facial expressions that tell you I should be afraid because your amygdala kind of keeps a record of dangerous situations so that you avoid them.
I did not do that. That's fascinating.
It's kind of like it has those associations. So let's say you meet somebody new and Fred's somebody, but they remind you of Uncle Joe, and Uncle Joe was abusive. You might really react to Fred, who had nothing to do with that and is a nice guy. But your amygdala says, hey, watch out. This is familiar. So the amygdala will do whatever to protect you and make you, scared of similar situations. But some people apparently have a larger right amygdala, which is right brain, some more nonverbal cues brain. And so they interpret events as more dangerous than they really are, but that also may protect them when things really are dangerous. Then, you can't say you're wrong, but you might say it doesn't fit in this situation. And that's another place therapists discount people saying, I'm being abused. Is, you're probably overreacting. And in some cases, people are overreacting, but in other cases, it's really true they're being abused. So, but yeah, the amygdala can play a part in that. Also, what's interesting about antisocial personalities, I read some research that said they have a hostility bias, that they see other people's neutral faces as hostile and other people's fearful faces as neutral. And their response often is to fight. rather than avoid. And so if they see someone with a neutral face and they know this person's being hostile to me, I'm going to fight with them. They're seeing a fight that isn't there, and they could pick on somebody. But if they are starting to pick on somebody and they are fearful, most people, when someone has a fearful face, it stops you in your tracks. Like, what I'm doing, I better stop what I'm doing. But they don't see a fearful face. They just see a neutral face. So they might keep being aggressive. So part of it is the problem people with these personality has that they don't even know about. And that's why in some cases, treatment really helps them overcome that. In other cases, treatment doesn't seem to touch the behavior, and antisocial is a harder personality to treat.
Right. Let's go into what to do. So let's say you're the victim. We're going to talk about the victim. We're going to talk about other professionals, how to kind of spot this or what to do, how to think about it differently. Let's say someone who maybe is recognizing in themselves that they have some control issues. What do you do?
The first, most simple and basic thing that someone can do is change their self-talk. That our self-talk, we often absorb from around us. I am really stupid. It really is all my fault, stuff like that. And to change your self-talk, say, wait a minute, no one deserves to be abused. I can make mistakes and not be abused. No one should be abused. And that's very empowering, because when I talk to people who've been abused, they're kind of like, well, I know I was part of the problem and I shouldn't have done this and shouldn't have done that. And at a technical level, maybe you're right, but the problem is this other person's behavior towards you. That's the real problem. Your part's pretty minor. Nobody deserves to be hit and kicked and thrown around and stuff like that. And people are like, really? Really?
Personal attacks against, yeah.
Yeah. So I think self-talk is a really easy place to start. You don't have to change anything. You don't have to confront everybody to tell yourself, I'm worthwhile. I should not be treated this way. This is wrong. This is inappropriate. Then I think getting help is one of the biggest things. Just talk to somebody so you're not isolated. I tell people that in workplace situations. Just talk to somebody. Don't carry this alone. And many workplaces have mechanisms to report like sexual harassment and other behavior. And if it's your supervisor who's bullying you, you don't want a rule that says you have to report it to your supervisor. So a lot of organizations realize that now. So you can report it to human resources or to somebody else. But I say talk to somebody about it, even if it's just a friend, so that you don't carry this around isolated, have it eat away at your stomach and your sleep and all of that. And then if you're the person that's reached out to, is say, keep an open mind. This might be true. This may be happening. And what I tell people evaluating situations, you always have to have 3 theories. It's true, it's not true, or it's partly true. Maybe both people contributing. But don't assume that it's not abuse. It may be abuse, and take that seriously. And so investigate or have an investigator investigate.
All right. Don't disbelieve.
Yeah. So with all of this, I think our society needs to really become educated about this. So everyone knows some warning signs. You see someone looking depressed, or that they can't have eye contact, that they look fearful for some reason. Are you okay? Do you need help? I forget where I was in my travels, but in the bathroom it said, I think it was about trafficking, and saying, are you safe? Are you with someone who, you're in danger from? Call this number. Here's something to do. You don't deserve to be taken advantage of. Like, I've been at conferences where truckers who support just finding out about human trafficking and such they have organizations to alert people, and they're keeping their eyes out for that. And that's really good. That's what you need, is the public to look at, are people being abused? Do they need help getting out of their situation?
Yeah, I guess the key is not believing everything you hear or everything you see. Ask questions. If someone's isolating or long friendships or you don't know why they disappeared, maybe inquire. Just take that extra step. If there's a little bit of a question mark, maybe explore a little bit further. One last question, and then we'll wrap it up. If you think that someone you know is, in a relationship like this and maybe being abused, neglected by someone who is, that dominating, intrusive personality type, and you go to the person and ask if they're okay, what if they say, yeah, I'm fine, I don't need anything? Like, how far should you go if you can't convince them that, you're seeing this from the outside?
I think it's in many ways a situational question, because if you're really picking up strong signs that the person really is in distress, even though the words coming out of their mouth are, I'm fine, it's like, I'm fine. You may want to push further or have someone look further. A quick example of this, and maybe this is a good one, is the Elizabeth Smart situation. She was 14. She was kidnapped from her home in the middle of the night and taken to the mountains outside, I forget what city she was in Utah, and ended up living with this guy who was assaulting her and keeping her isolated for 9 months. They would walk in the community in white robes and say, we're very religious, don't talk to us, don't bother us. And they're very covered up. And there was a big search for her, give credit to her parents and family and the police, the local police there. And at one point, someone thought maybe that's Elizabeth Smart. There was the three of them, the guy and his wife and Elizabeth Smart. And so someone, I think it started with someone came up to them and said, are you okay? Something like that. Anyway, they alerted the police. So police came up to them, police woman, I think it was, came up to them and said, I want to talk to you. And the guy says, oh, leave us alone. We're very pious people. And said, no, I'm going to separate her from you and talk to her. And she did. And for, I guess, 10, 15 minutes, Elizabeth Smart denied that she was Elizabeth Smart. She said she's doing fine and all of that. And then finally said, you're right. So the police had to be really assertive about separating her and interviewing her and talking to her. So I would say, if you're in a situation like that, get the police to help, because they have the authority to say, you need to come away with me, and so you can be safe, so we can talk. But I think having authority figures involved who understand is important. And I think just as a culture, realizing there are abusive relationships going on, and we need to be supportive and need to keep our eyes open.
Yeah. Awareness. So thank you, Bill. We'll put links to the Bullies book. It's called Our New World of Adult Bullies. We'll put links to, DB helplines in there as well. Every country has them, every state, probably every city. So online, there's help available, is what I'm saying. We'll put a link to our Dating Radar book. We wrote that, might be 10 years ago now, Bill, I'm not sure. That has a lot of information in there about abusive relationships. A link to the New Ways for Couples course, and the article that Bill just recently wrote, and the ConflictInfluencer.com alert sign up. Please leave us a review. Thank you for listening. Hit that like button if you're on YouTube. Keep learning and practicing skills. Be kind to yourself. Be kind to others, while we all try to keep the conflict small and find the missing piece.
It's All Your Fault is a production of True Story FM. Engineering by Andy Nelson. Music by Wolf Samuels, John Coggins, and Ziv Moran. Find the show notes, and transcripts at truestory.fm or highconflictinstitute.com/podcast. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.